Authenticity matters when examining the law. What follows is a comprehensive look at real events, presenting unfiltered and unedited perspectives. Experience raw, unaltered footage directly from the front lines of justice, where every second carries profound consequences.
Ma'am, what are you doing on this property?
This is my home. I'm watering my garden.
I need ID. You don't look like you live here.
Officer, I do live here. I'm Judge Patricia Williams.
Yeah? We'll see about that.
The camera captured everything. The timestamp read 7:23 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning in September. Judge Patricia Williams was watering her front garden, still in her comfortable morning clothes, when the police cruiser pulled into her driveway. What happened next would shock the nation and cost the city $750,000 in one of the most expensive cases of mistaken identity and racial profiling in recent memory. Judge Patricia Williams had served on the federal bench for 12 years. She was respected by colleagues, feared by criminals, and known throughout the legal community for her sharp intellect and unwavering commitment to justice. At 54 years old, she lived in an upscale neighborhood where she had been a homeowner for nearly 2 decades. Her house was a beautiful colonial-style home with perfectly manicured landscaping that she tended to herself every morning before heading to court. That Tuesday started like any other. Patricia woke up at 6, made her coffee, and stepped outside to water her flower beds before getting ready for what would be a busy day of hearings. She was wearing gray sweatpants and an old law school t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested she held one of the most powerful positions in the American legal system. Officer Leroy Brown had been patrolling the neighborhood for about 3 hours when he received a call that would change his life forever. A resident had reported seeing a suspicious person walking around the upscale area, claiming they looked out of place and might be casing houses for potential break-ins. The caller described seeing a black woman in casual clothing moving between different properties. Now here's where this story takes its first disturbing turn. The neighborhood where Judge Williams lived was predominantly white and affluent. Over the past year, there had been exactly 0 break-ins reported in the area. The crime rate was so low that most patrol officers considered it a quiet assignment, but Officer Brown approached the call with an assumption that would prove catastrophic. He spotted Patricia in her front yard and immediately decided she matched the description from the anonymous caller. Without running her address through the system, without checking property records, and without any actual evidence of wrongdoing, he pulled into her driveway with his lights flashing. Patricia looked up from her roses, confused by the police car in her driveway. She walked toward the officer with a friendly smile, assuming perhaps there had been an incident in the neighborhood and he needed to ask questions. She had no idea she was about to become the target of the most humiliating experience of her professional life. Officer Brown stepped out of his vehicle and immediately took an aggressive stance. He didn't introduce himself politely or explain why he was there. Instead, he demanded to know what she was doing in the neighborhood. Patricia, still confused, explained that she was watering her garden at her own home. Brown looked at the house, then back at her, his expression suggesting he didn't believe a word she was saying. He asked her if she could prove she lived there. Patricia was taken aback by the question. She was standing in her own front yard, wearing casual clothes, holding a watering can. The situation felt surreal. She pointed to the house behind her and said this was her home. Brown shook his head and said he needed to see identification and proof of residence. Quick question for everyone watching. Have you ever been questioned by police while doing something completely normal at your own home? Let me know in the comments because what happens next gets even more unbelievable. Patricia went inside to get her identification, thinking this would quickly resolve the misunderstanding. She brought out her driver's license, which clearly showed her address matching the house where they were standing. She also grabbed some mail from her kitchen counter that displayed her name and address. Any reasonable person would have immediately realized their mistake and apologized. But Officer Brown wasn't done. He looked at the identification and said it could be fake. He examined the mail and suggested she might have stolen it. His behavior was becoming increasingly hostile, and Patricia was starting to understand that this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was something much more troubling. She remained calm and asked Officer Brown why he was questioning her presence at her own home. She asked if there had been a crime reported in the area. He told her that someone had called about suspicious activity, and she matched the description. Patricia asked what specifically was suspicious about watering plants in her own front yard. Brown said her behavior seemed nervous and evasive. This is where Patricia made a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. She pulled out her phone and started recording the interaction. The moment that camera came out, Officer Brown's demeanor shifted dramatically. He ordered her to put the phone away. She calmly stated that she had the right to record a police officer performing his duties in public. Brown stepped closer to her, invading her personal space. He told her that recording him was interfering with his investigation. Patricia asked what exactly he was investigating, since she had provided identification proving she lived at this address. Brown said he still wasn't convinced she belonged in this neighborhood and needed to conduct a more thorough investigation. Here's where this story takes another shocking turn. Patricia decided to reveal her identity. She told Officer Brown that she was a federal judge and that his behavior was completely inappropriate. She expected this information would immediately end the confrontation and result in an apology. Instead, Officer Brown laughed. He actually laughed at her. He said that if she was really a federal judge, she would be dressed professionally and wouldn't be outside watering plants in old clothes. He said he didn't believe her and that claiming to be a judge was probably another lie to try to get out of trouble. Patricia couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had just told this officer her actual profession, and he was calling her a liar to her face. She offered to show him her judicial identification card, but Brown said those could be faked too. He was determined to believe that she was some kind of criminal, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The situation escalated when Brown said he was going to search her property for evidence of criminal activity. Patricia firmly told him he had no right to search her home without a warrant. She explained that he had no probable cause and no evidence of any crime. Brown replied that her refusal to cooperate was making her look more suspicious. At this point, neighbors had started to notice the commotion. A few people came outside to see what was happening. Patricia recognized several of them as longtime neighbors who knew exactly who she was. She called out to Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down, asking her to confirm that Patricia had lived in this neighborhood for nearly 20 years. Mrs. Henderson walked over and told Officer Brown that Patricia was indeed a longtime resident and a federal judge. She said the officer was making a terrible mistake. Brown dismissed Mrs. Henderson's statement, saying that neighbors might lie to protect each other. He was spiraling deeper into a position that would soon become impossible to defend. What happened next would be captured on multiple cameras and become evidence in a lawsuit that would cost the city more money than most people earn in a lifetime. Officer Brown made a decision that would end his career and expose a pattern of behavior that had been overlooked for far too long. The story we're about to continue involves backup officers, false accusations, and a chain of events that would ultimately reach the highest levels of city government. But before we get there, Patricia Williams was about to experience something that would test every ounce of her judicial composure and change how she viewed the very system she had dedicated her life to serving. Officer Brown radioed for backup, claiming he had encountered a suspicious individual who was being uncooperative and making false claims about her identity. Within minutes, 2 additional patrol cars arrived at Patricia's home. Officers Sarah Martinez and David Chen stepped out of their vehicles and immediately sensed something was wrong with the situation. Officer Martinez approached Patricia and asked her calmly what was happening. Patricia explained that she was watering her garden at her own home when Officer Brown arrived and began questioning her right to be there. She showed Martinez her identification and pointed to the mail that clearly demonstrated her residency. Martinez looked at the evidence, then at the house, then back at Patricia with an expression that suggested she understood they had a serious problem. Officer Chen walked over to Brown and asked him quietly what had prompted the initial stop. Brown explained about the suspicious person call, but when Chen asked for specifics about what made Patricia's behavior suspicious, Brown's answers became vague and contradictory. Chen had been a police officer for 15 years and recognized the signs of a stop that had gone completely off the rails. Meanwhile, more neighbors had gathered. Patricia's next-door neighbor, Robert Kim, came outside and immediately recognized what was happening. Robert was an attorney who had known Patricia for over a decade. He approached Officer Martinez and provided a detailed character reference for Patricia, explaining her position as a federal judge and her standing in the community. But Officer Brown wasn't backing down. Despite the mounting evidence that he had made a catastrophic error, he doubled down on his position. He told the other officers that Patricia was being deceptive and that her story didn't add up. He said her casual clothing and early morning activity were suspicious for someone claiming to be a federal judge. This is where Officer Martinez made a decision that would later be praised by investigators and civil rights attorneys. She pulled Brown aside and told him directly that he needed to end this interaction immediately. She said they had overwhelming evidence that Patricia was exactly who she claimed to be, and continuing this investigation would only make things worse. Brown refused to listen. He said he wanted to call Patricia's claims by contacting the federal courthouse to verify her identity. Martinez pointed out that they were standing in front of a house that belonged to Patricia according to multiple forms of identification, with neighbors vouching for her identity, and there was absolutely no evidence of any criminal activity. The conversation between the officers was being captured on Patricia's phone, and she was documenting every word. She remained remarkably composed throughout the entire ordeal, but inside she was processing the implications of what was happening. As a federal judge, she had seen countless cases of police misconduct and racial profiling, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different. Officer Chen approached Patricia and apologized for the situation. He said they would be leaving shortly and that she was free to continue with her morning routine. Patricia thanked him for his professionalism, but made it clear that Officer Brown's behavior was unacceptable and would not be ignored. That's when Brown made his final and most devastating mistake. He told Chen that he wasn't satisfied with the resolution and wanted to arrest Patricia for obstruction of justice. He claimed she had interfered with his investigation by recording and by refusing to comply with his requests. Chen looked at him in disbelief and told him that would be the worst decision of his career. But Brown was beyond reason at this point. He approached Patricia and told her she was under arrest. He pulled out his handcuffs and moved toward her. The neighbors who were watching gasped in shock. Mrs. Henderson started crying. Robert Kim immediately began recording on his own phone and started shouting that Brown was making an enormous mistake. Patricia stood perfectly still and clearly stated that she was not resisting arrest, but that Officer Brown was violating her constitutional rights. She said his actions were without probable cause and that he would face serious consequences for arresting a federal judge in her own front yard without justification. Officer Martinez stepped between Brown and Patricia. She told Brown that she would not allow him to make this arrest. She said the situation had already gone too far and that arresting Patricia would destroy not just Brown's career but potentially the careers of everyone present. The tension between the officers was palpable. Brown ignored Martinez and reached for Patricia's arm. The moment he made physical contact, Patricia clearly stated that she did not consent to being touched and that she was being unlawfully detained. She asked Brown to state the specific crime he believed she had committed. He said obstruction of justice and disorderly conduct. Patricia asked him to explain how watering her garden at her own home constituted disorderly conduct. She asked how providing identification and cooperating with his requests constituted obstruction of justice. Brown couldn't provide coherent answers to either question, but he continued trying to put the handcuffs on her. That's when Officer Chen physically intervened. He grabbed Brown's arm and told him to stop. Chen said he would not be part of arresting an innocent woman in her own front yard, especially a federal judge. The confrontation between the officers created a scene that the neighbors would never forget. Patricia used this moment to make one final attempt at reason. She told all three officers that she understood mistakes happen, but that Brown's refusal to acknowledge the obvious truth was turning a simple misunderstanding into a federal civil rights violation. She said if they arrested her, the consequences would extend far beyond just Brown's career. Brown finally released Patricia's arm, but he wasn't done yet. He told her that he was issuing her a citation for disorderly conduct and that she would need to appear in court. Patricia looked at the citation and saw that Brown had written down incorrect information, including the wrong address and an inaccurate description of the alleged incident. She pointed out the errors to Officer Martinez, who examined the citation and shook her head in frustration. Martinez told Brown that the citation was improper and legally insufficient. She said issuing a false citation could result in additional charges against him. Brown crumpled up the citation and threw it on Patricia's front lawn. The three officers finally left Patricia's property after nearly 45 minutes of harassment. Patricia stood in her driveway, surrounded by supportive neighbors, holding her phone with video evidence of everything that had transpired. She knew that her morning routine had just provided her with the foundation for a lawsuit that would send shockwaves through the city's police department. But Patricia Williams wasn't finished with Officer Brown. Not even close. What she did next would expose a pattern of misconduct that had been hiding in plain sight for years and would ultimately cost the city far more than just money. It would cost careers, reputations, and force a complete overhaul of police training and accountability measures. Patricia went inside her house and immediately began documenting everything while the details were fresh in her memory. She wrote down exact times, specific quotes from Officer Brown, and detailed descriptions of each officer's behavior. She uploaded her video recording to multiple cloud storage accounts and sent copies to her personal email addresses. As a federal judge, she understood better than most how evidence could disappear or be challenged in court. But Patricia didn't stop there. She called her longtime friend and colleague, Judge Robert Harrison, who served on the same federal district court. Harrison had known Patricia for over 15 years and was shocked by what she described. He advised her to contact the FBI's Civil Rights Division immediately, since what Brown had done constituted a clear violation of federal civil rights law. Within 2 hours of the incident, Patricia had filed complaints with 5 different agencies. She contacted the city's Police Internal Affairs Division, the State Police Oversight Board, the FBI's Civil Rights Unit, the Department of Justice, and the local district attorney's office. She wasn't taking any chances that this would be swept under the rug or handled with a simple reprimand. The response was swift and unprecedented. By that afternoon, FBI agents were interviewing Patricia at her home. They reviewed her video evidence and took statements from all the neighbors who had witnessed the incident. Special Agent Lisa Rodriguez, who specialized in police misconduct cases, told Patricia that Brown's behavior was among the most egregious examples of racial profiling she had encountered in 20 years of federal law enforcement. But here's where the story takes an even more disturbing turn. The FBI's investigation into Officer Brown revealed a pattern of misconduct that had been systematically covered up by the police department for over 6 years. Brown had received 43 complaints during his career, with 31 of them involving allegations of racial profiling or excessive force against minorities. The department's Internal Affairs Division had dismissed or minimally disciplined Brown for every single complaint. They had labeled complainants as unreliable, claimed evidence was insufficient, or ruled that Brown's actions were within department policy. The FBI discovered that Brown had cost the city over $200,000 in previous settlements, all of which had included non-disclosure agreements to keep the misconduct hidden from public view. Agent Rodriguez found that Brown had a particular pattern of targeting well-dressed African Americans in upscale neighborhoods. He had stopped a black surgeon leaving his own medical practice, claiming he looked suspicious. He had detained a black professor walking on his own university campus, saying he didn't belong there. He had even arrested a black off-duty police officer from another jurisdiction who was visiting family in the area. Each incident followed the same script. Brown would approach with immediate suspicion, refuse to accept identification or explanations, escalate the situation through aggressive behavior, and then file reports that painted his victims as uncooperative or threatening. The department consistently backed his version of events, despite mounting evidence of a clear pattern. Patricia learned that Officer Martinez had actually filed 3 separate complaints about Brown's behavior over the past 2 years. Martinez had witnessed Brown using excessive force during traffic stops and had reported his inappropriate comments about minority suspects. All of her complaints had been dismissed by supervisors who claimed there wasn't enough evidence to take action. The investigation also revealed that Brown had received specialized training on racial bias and constitutional policing just 6 months before the incident with Patricia. He had scored poorly on the training assessments and had made comments to other officers suggesting he didn't believe the training was necessary or valuable. Have you ever wondered how officers like Brown managed to keep their jobs despite repeated complaints? The answer lies in a system designed to protect police from accountability rather than protect citizens from police misconduct. The FBI's investigation expanded when they discovered that Brown wasn't acting alone. His supervising sergeant, Michael Foster, had been actively covering up Brown's misconduct for years. Foster had edited incident reports to remove references to racial profiling, had coached Brown on how to write reports that would avoid scrutiny, and had intimidated witnesses who tried to file complaints. Foster had also been reassigning Brown to neighborhoods with higher minority populations, essentially using him as a tool to harass and intimidate residents who might be seen as undesirable by certain segments of the community. The FBI found emails between Foster and Brown discussing which areas needed more aggressive policing and which types of people should be viewed with extra suspicion. The scandal reached even higher when investigators discovered that Police Chief William Morrison had been briefed on Brown's pattern of complaints multiple times, but had chosen to take no meaningful action. Morrison had been more concerned with avoiding negative publicity than addressing obvious misconduct within his department. Morrison had actually blocked attempts by reform-minded officers to implement better oversight procedures. He had refused requests for body cameras, had opposed civilian review boards, and had consistently lobbied against transparency measures that would have exposed problems like Brown's behavior much earlier. Patricia's case became the catalyst for a federal investigation that would ultimately encompass the entire police department. The Department of Justice launched a pattern and practice investigation, examining whether the department had systematically violated the civil rights of minority residents through discriminatory policing practices. 3 weeks after the incident in Patricia's front yard, Officer Brown was arrested at his home by federal agents. He was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal crime that carries up to 10 years in prison. The charges specifically cited his pattern of targeting minority citizens and his abuse of police authority to intimidate and harass innocent people. Sergeant Foster was arrested the same day on charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The FBI had discovered that he had destroyed evidence related to previous complaints against Brown and had falsified official documents to protect him from accountability. Foster faced up to 20 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts. Chief Morrison resigned in disgrace before he could be fired, but his resignation didn't protect him from the ongoing federal investigation. Federal prosecutors were examining whether his deliberate indifference to civil rights violations constituted criminal conspiracy. Morrison's 25-year career in law enforcement ended with him hiring criminal defense attorneys instead of receiving retirement honors. The city's response was immediate and expensive. Within a month of the FBI arrests, Patricia received a settlement offer of $750,000. The city's lawyers knew they had no defense against her claims and wanted to resolve the case quickly to limit further damage to the city's reputation and finances. But Patricia wasn't interested in a quick settlement that would allow the city to avoid accountability. She wanted systemic changes that would prevent other citizens from experiencing what she had endured. Her lawsuit demanded not just monetary compensation, but comprehensive police reform, including mandatory body cameras, civilian oversight, bias training, and transparent complaint procedures. The city initially resisted her reform demands, hoping they could simply pay money and move on. That resistance ended when Patricia's legal team released portions of the FBI investigation showing the extent of the cover-up. Local media began reporting on Brown's history of misconduct and the department's systematic failure to address it. Public outrage was swift and intense. Citizens who had never paid much attention to police accountability suddenly understood that their tax dollars had been protecting an officer who was violating people's constitutional rights. City council meetings became heated forums where residents demanded answers about how Brown had been allowed to continue his pattern of abuse for so many years. The political pressure became unbearable when other victims of Brown's misconduct began coming forward publicly. The non-disclosure agreements that had previously kept his victims silent were no longer enforceable since the FBI investigation had made his pattern of behavior a matter of public record. Patricia's case had opened the floodgates for accountability that had been blocked for years. But the full consequences of that Tuesday morning in her front yard were still unfolding, and they would ultimately reshape how the entire city approached police accountability and civil rights. The settlement negotiations took months, but Patricia's legal strategy was brilliant. Instead of accepting the city's initial offer, she used the media attention to build public pressure for comprehensive reform. Every week brought new revelations about Brown's misconduct, and each revelation made the city's position weaker. Patricia's attorney, Maria Santos, was a civil rights specialist who had won major settlements against police departments across the country. Santos understood that this case represented an opportunity to create lasting change, not just secure compensation for her client. She leaked strategic information to journalists, organized press conferences with other victims, and built a coalition of community groups demanding reform. The breakthrough came when Santos discovered that the city had actually been paying Brown overtime to work special assignments in minority neighborhoods. The FBI had found records showing Brown was specifically requested for these assignments because supervisors believed his aggressive approach would intimidate residents and reduce complaints about other issues like noise violations or loitering. This revelation proved that Brown's racial profiling wasn't just tolerated by the department. It was actively encouraged and financially rewarded. The city had been paying him extra money to violate people's constitutional rights. When this information became public, the political fallout was immediate and devastating. 3 city council members called for the resignation of the entire police leadership structure. The mayor, who had initially defended the department, suddenly announced his support for comprehensive police reform. Local businesses began threatening to relocate if the city didn't address its policing problems, citing concerns about liability and reputation. The federal judge overseeing Patricia's lawsuit made it clear that he was not satisfied with the city's response to the systemic problems the case had revealed. Judge Brown, ironically sharing a last name with the disgraced officer, stated during hearings that monetary damages alone would not adequately address the constitutional violations that had occurred. Patricia testified before the city council about her experience and its broader implications. She spoke about the psychological impact of being treated like a criminal in her own front yard, but more importantly, she emphasized how her position and resources had protected her in ways that weren't available to most citizens. She pointed out that if she hadn't been a federal judge with legal knowledge, connections, and financial resources, Officer Brown's misconduct would likely have been covered up just like his previous violations. She said her case proved that the system was broken for everyone, and that meaningful reform was necessary to protect all citizens, regardless of their position or background. The emotional impact of her testimony was amplified when other victims spoke at the same hearing. A young college student described being arrested by Brown while walking home from the library. A small business owner explained how Brown had harassed customers outside his shop, driving away business and threatening his family's livelihood. So what started as a simple morning routine in Patricia Williams' garden became a $750,000 lesson in accountability. Officer Brown lost his career and faced federal charges. The city implemented sweeping police reforms, and Patricia proved that justice, while sometimes delayed, can still prevail when people refuse to stay silent. This case was brutal, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.
Every story has 2 sides, but the truth remains singular. We are here to hold power to account, letting verified records do the talking. The documents simply do not lie. Thanks for watching and supporting independent media.